Good Thursday afternoon, everybody. I'm meteorologist Tim Pandages here with your Atlantic Tropical Update. And with a special advisory yesterday evening, we now have our sixth named storm of the season. Tropical Storm Fiona developed out of Tropical Depression number 7. Today is September 15th, 2022. Here's a look at our updated scorecard of the Atlantic Basin versus the Eastern Pacific. Eastern Pacific still beating us out significantly with 12 named systems so far, and we're sitting at half that with the newest addition there being Fiona, sitting at a mid-grade tropical storm at the moment. So we needed winds of 39 miles per hour or greater. We have that with 50 mile per hour winds sustained, moving due west at 14 miles per hour. And when we look at this on the infrared satellite imagery, at face value, it looks pretty interesting, right? Pretty well organized. We've got a flare-up of convection indicated by the cold cloud tops. The blacks and white shading there indicating very cold cloud tops stretching up to a high altitude. But there's something at play here that you can't see from the infrared satellite imagery, and that's the influence of moderate westerly wind shear that is much more evident when we look at it on visible satellites. You can see the low-level circulation being exposed here, with westerly wind shear coming on in and tilting the system over, so dislocating all of that convection that we just saw. That's pretty healthy looking, stretching up to a high altitude off to the east of its low-level center. So it's tilted, and until it can align itself and straighten up vertically, it's going to be hard for this to really intensify very much, which is good news because it's heading towards the northern Leeward Islands, and the tropical storm force winds associated with it look to reach the islands by about 24 hours out from now by the recording of this video. So here's a look at the upper level winds throwing that westerly and northwesterly shear at Fiona at the moment. Now this is new because it hasn't had to encounter the wind shear. It was sitting over an upper level high that was actually allowing it to organize much faster than models anticipated. High level divergence, surface divergence or convergence, and divergence aloft. So it was ventilating properly when it was out under that area of high pressure in the upper levels. Now it's influencing winds coming in out of the west to northwest aloft. That's tilting it. It's also surrounded by a lot of dry air on all flanks. This is nothing new, and this is something that has been plaguing Atlantic systems all season long. But despite that, it is still holding itself together aside from the wind shear. It's got the warm ocean temperatures and overall pretty conducive environment, so to speak, compared to what we've been used to so far this season. So what does the track look like from the National Hurricane Center? Well, pretty straightforward over at least the next 48 to 72 hours. Due west with minimal strengthening because of that wind shear tilting the system over, so only up to 60 mile per hour winds by tomorrow morning, and by Friday evening, Saturday morning, still at 60 miles per hour, and this is the time that will be impacting the northern Leeward Islands, areas like Barbuda, Martinique, Guadeloupe, experiencing tropical storm force winds and a lot of heavy rainfall. But going past that point in time, the interaction with land and eventually moving over Puerto Rico as well, things start to get a little bit less straightforward because we start to see a more northerly turn to this track. The lobe on our cone of uncertainty gets much larger because at this point in time, 5 days out, the confidence really starts to drop, and you're going to see why when I show you all of our spaghetti plots. They are all over the place, but the basic consensus shows that it may take a northerly turn by early next week. Now, its current forecast track does spare Fiona from moving over what we call the shredder in the Caribbean. This is the highest terrain in all of the Caribbean, Pico Duarte, with a peak height of 10,000 feet. Enhanced terrain, or terrain at all, is bad for tropical systems. It shears them apart, but enhanced terrain really enacts shear, and if it was to move over this, it would be the latest on the list of many storms that have met their end moving over the Dominican Republic. But right now that track looks to be to the north of the island, so it may emerge north of the Greater Antilles as a stronger system and still holding itself together as it moves into the Bahamas and the Turks and Caicos area. So here are the alerts that are currently up for the Caribbean. We've got tropical storm warnings. That means tropical storm conditions are expected within the next 36 hours in areas in the orange. So Barbuda, Antigua. To the south, we've got tropical storm watches there. Likely those winds not making it all the way to you, but the watch is up for that potentiality as we get on into the day tomorrow. So we're on advisories now. Our next one will be coming out at 4 p.m. This is in Central Time. We'll get an updated cone, an updated forecast from the Hurricane Center with their full advisory, and then we'll see intermediate advisories in between those. So track updates 4 times a day, intermediate advisories 4 times a day. Overall, 8 different updates from the National Hurricane Center coming our way since there are active warnings and watches out for land areas. So here's what I'm talking about with our spaghetti plots. This is a compilation of all of our different computer models. Each line is a different computer model. Look at the spread we're working with here. From Bermuda all the way to the south of Jamaica. So that's a huge spread, which is why that confidence as we get farther out in the forecast time really drops. Here's a look at our GFS ensemble. Remember the GFS ensemble is the GFS model run 30 different times. There are 30 members. We tweak it ever so slightly to see if there's a different outcome. Very straightforward going through the next 48 to 72 hours, right? Due west movement. But then it starts to interact with steering mechanisms in the atmosphere that are at play here that may pull it north. The storm may be stronger and sense that, move farther north. It may stay weaker and move farther to the west. That's what the GFS is showing here with that spread. The European showing similar, although a little bit more of a consensus for a farther west track for a longer duration of time, taking that turn north a little bit later. Still potentially putting Bermuda in the bullseye there and moving over Jamaica as well. So still a large spread. Now let's compare the two models, the GFS and the European. GFS in the yellow, European in the red. Going forward, again, similarities here, taking it over the northern Leeward Islands towards Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, and then taking a turn to the north. GFS takes that turn quicker. A stronger system emerges to the southwest of Bermuda. Look at the size of that storm there. European has it over the Bahamas, strengthening at this time as well. Now timing differences really start to emerge here. GFS shoots it off quicker into the North Atlantic, past Bermuda, and then here we are next weekend, the 25th, and we've still got the European lagging behind with a strong system still at this point in time southwest of Bermuda. Now notice that both of those models, the most recent updates, do keep it away from the eastern seaboard, which is good news. But again, may be impactful. May have to look at that a little bit closer for Bermuda as we get closer. So why that huge spread? Well, I talked about the steering mechanisms in play. It looks at this point in time, by this weekend, when it gets to be right around the Greater Antilles, Hispaniola area, that we'll have an area of high pressure, a ridge, a dominant ridge sitting over the central parts of the country, another dominant ridge area of high pressure sitting over the central Atlantic. Now, between those areas of high pressure, there'll be a weakness developing, a trough dipping on in, a front along it that should shield the eastern seaboard, but it provides an escape hatch for that storm that up until then will be moving due west to slip its way north, especially if it's a stronger storm. It'll be able to sense the upper level steering a little bit more and take that exit hatch a little bit sooner. So that's what things are looking like now. That looks to be the most likely scenario with what we've been presented with so far. Another way to look at this is where storms have tracked that have been in a similar position to where Fiona is at this time in the past. So Fiona's position, lat long there, 16.5 north and 54.8 west. Here's all the storms since records have been kept of storms that have been within 50 miles of that location where they have tracked. Notice a lot of them take that turn to the north. Now I'll narrow it down even more and look at just September storms that have been in that general area. Very, very similar. Of course, there's going to be some outliers that track farther to the west and make it into the Gulf of Mexico. So what I'm trying to say with this is that everything is still in play, even though it's more likely that we see a scenario that loops to the north and eventually out to sea. So despite that, it's still going to be impacting land, the northern Leeward Islands. We've got tropical storm force wind likelihood here, now up to 50 to even 60%, Barbuda, Antigua area, just north of Guadeloupe. Now the timing of the arrival of these winds looks to be by Friday night at 8 p.m. That's when those 39 mile per hour winds or greater look to arrive along the northern Leeward Islands. And then we get to Saturday morning, the U.S. British Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico getting in on some of those winds by Saturday evening. On top of the wind, we're also looking at a lot of rain here. In fact, flooding will likely be a big problem as Fiona moves through these areas. Rainfall projections from our long-range GFS model here points to well over a half a foot of rain falling in a lot of these areas that have mountainous terrain. Puerto Rico, for instance, there. Flash flooding going to be an issue. That's what we're going to watch for as we go further out in time, as we see the impacts of Fiona build into those areas. All right, that's the latest on Fiona moving towards the northern Leeward Islands. For the next update, come from David Paul later on this evening, Chief Meteorologist David Paul. So until next time, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, or on Facebook. And I'm also on TikTok at Tim Talk Weather.